I'm going to be the boss. I'm going to decide how I'm going to live. I'm going to fire my boss and I'm going to make a living for myself. So here's a different question you should ask yourself. Beyond the many self-improvement gurus and sages, perhaps like myself and perhaps like the ones that you admire, there seems to be this trite question that they ask. It's, or imagine the best version of yourself. What kind of person would that be? What kind of car would he drive? What kind of job would he have? What kind of income would he acquire? And whilst I feel this is very valuable, and to be transparent with you, I don't believe that many young men are given that opportunity to meditate on very, very deeply. I mean, think about that for just a moment. When was the last time you justified your existence? Now, okay, on the surface, that might seem like a very callous and unempathetic question. But when did you actually think about the value that you could give to the world, that you could bring to the world? And this is something that they won't ever teach you in school, and is part of the reason why many men have difficulty monetizing themselves. It's just that they haven't learned to monetize their value or ask that question of themselves. What exchange of value am I offering my neighbors, my friends, and strangers in general? And there's another way I think that we can approach this. And this is a question that I've been sitting on for a very long time, and it often keeps me up at night thinking about it, because it follows the premise of the Buddha, or the story of the Buddha. That's probably a better way of explaining it. Now, to those of you uninitiated, the story of the Buddha is a timeless one. The Buddha was a prince, and he grew up in a very, very wealthy situation. He never knew any suffering. That's what his father wanted for him. He was always kept well fed, always had all the trappings of success, never knew pain, never knew suffering. Now, unbeknownst to his father, the Buddha, who was later called the Buddha, became very cynical of people. He became very distrusting, and he didn't really understand. He wasn't fulfilled ultimately. He had everything he wanted, but why did he feel this pain that something was missing in his life? And he began to look very inquisitively at the parameters of his kingdom, of his palace, and begin to wonder, well, what else is out there? What is my father hiding from me? So one evening, he snuck out of the palace and he found suffering. He found pain in its transparency. He found people living in poverty, people going hungry, people without homes, without roofs over their head. And you think, goodness gracious me, what is this? And then he was posed with a very difficult conundrum, and that was to live back in ecstasy and in the fruits of his palace, or to go out into the world and poke it. And that's exactly what he did. He went out and he lived like a beggar. He lived among those people in poverty, in pain and suffering, until he found something out that many people spend their entire lives trying to find out. And once they find out that this kind of key teaching, you kind of look back at all those wasted years. And the teaching is this: all life is suffering and all life is pain. Now, on the surface, that might sound very nihilistic, but it's not. Essentially, the teaching is that the Buddha found himself suffering when he had everything in the world, when he had all the trappings of success. He found himself in pain and suffering. When he went out into the world, he found himself in pain and suffering. And when he had a bit of both, he found himself in pain and suffering. And this came at the hands of those 40 years sat under the tree where he so-called reached enlightenment, so the story goes. And that is the story of the Buddha. Now you look at such a story and you think to yourself, wow, that's quite a claim. But this leads me to, I think, the most intelligent question that you can ask yourself, and the same question that has been giving me sleepless nights. And it's not so much a trite question in the way that I pitched to you in the start of this video, the idea that what would you say? You have to decide for yourself what kind of life you want to live and justify your existence, what value you're going to bring to the world, and all that. And that's all good. That has its place. But the real question is this: what kind of pain can you tolerate? Now, I don't mean a physical pain. I mean a kind of amalgamation of mental, physical, and spiritual pain as the consequence of the life that you live. Let me give you an example. So here's a common American dream, a Westerner's dream, the idea of firing your boss, quitting your 9 to 5. I don't want to answer to my boss anymore. I'm going to be the boss. I'm going to decide how I'm going to live. I'm going to fire my boss and I'm going to make a living for myself. Very attractive idea, very good idea, I think, for the majority, well, for some people at least. And herein lies the roots to my question for you, or conundrum for you, is that once you fire your boss, or if you fire your boss, you then have to give up the security of your income, which is based on a contractual agreement. Every month you're giving a certain retainer for the value you bring to said company. And that is now gone. So you've traded in, I suppose, the pain of having to answer to a superior to the uncertainty of not knowing when you're going to be paid next. And then you need to factor into that equation, well, if it's not my boss and my company that is going to pay me, who is? So then you need to go and find the people who are going to pay you next. You need to find clients if you're going to offer a product or a service. You need to be sending cold emails or cold calling people. You need to taste the bitterness of rejection more frequently, very frequently, in fact. So choose your pain there. The pain of answering to a superior who perhaps you secretly despise, or the pain of uncertainty. I think this is something that many people who find this whole, Western attractiveness about being your own boss don't really factor into that equation. Is that, yes, when you get it right, it's probably a better way to live in terms of, let's say, your flexibility and you're in control of your income, and ultimately you are responsible for the direction of your life. You've got both hands on the wheel and you don't need to answer to anyone. The financial health of your life is yours. But then again, not a lot of people reach that stage, and not a lot of people are willing to endure the pain that I've just clearly kind of lined out. Now, you can extrapolate this to any kind of experience, because if you will indulge me for just a moment, if you think back to the problems that you had last week, perhaps they've changed into new ones. Perhaps they've been upgraded. Perhaps they've changed. They've transformed. They've transmutated into something else. And therein lies one of the key structures to life, is that problems don't go away. They get upgraded or they get exchanged. And you'll never be rid of them. So to kind of come towards the conclusion of this evening's meditations, I'm going to offer you this idea. It's think very intimately, think very deeply, think very aggressively about the pain that you are willing to tolerate, because it's coming for you in one form or another. So you might be sitting watching me on your phone or your computer, your laptop, your iPad, whatever the fuck you're watching me on, and in a personal predicament about what life you're living and the direction where you're supposed to go and what you ultimately want to move away from. You might be thinking, when I get X amount of money, or when I do this or want to do that, then I'll be happy, then I'll be away from this pain. It doesn't work like that. I wish it did. I wish it did. But the only certainty in life is pain and suffering. And as nihilistic as that may sound, it's a good thing to come to that conclusion now, because then you can orientate and create your reality based on those principles. So think more carefully. What are you willing to tolerate? And this may open you up to other, let's say, realizations. I know it did me. Maybe your 9 to 5 isn't that bad. I'm really not a huge proponent of everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, especially if you enjoy your 9 to 5. I've had great 9 to 5s. I really have. And whilst I think I was willing to tolerate a different pain in terms of more entrepreneurial pursuits, self-employment pursuits, I still enjoyed that experience. And the pain of that particular pursuit, that particular occupation, wasn't that bad. It was tolerable. And that, I think, should leave you guys a lot of hope. That it doesn't always need to be supercars and fancy clothes and all these kind of trappings of success that we chase every single day. It's about, are you willing to tolerate the pain that maybe comes with that equation? Because God knows they might be thinking about the fact that they can't lock down the love of their life because they're always, let's say, aware that these women might be scheming them, that they're only after them because of their success. It gets complicated, guys. It honestly does. I'm not saying you shouldn't try, but I think you should factor that into the equation, definitely. Brothers, if you enjoyed this evening's meditation, if you kind of maybe get a little bit of a feel for where I'm kind of inviting you to consider something a little bit more intuitively, then you can subscribe to myself and I'll bring you something else very, very soon. Take care.